In a world filled with noise and chatter, where words tumble from mouths like autumn leaves falling from trees, little Emma remained silent, trapped in her own mind, her fingers frozen when attempting to form signs, her eyes cast downward when others tried to connect. Doctors called it selective mutism with possible autism spectrum traits, but her mother called it heartbreak. Watching her beautiful child retreat further into isolation, with each passing day, then came the morning when everything changed. The day a golden retriever with soulful brown eyes and a slight limp walked into their lives, the dog that nobody wanted, somehow becoming the one thing Emma needed most to find her voice. If this story of an extraordinary connection between a silent child and a rescue dog who understood what no human could touches you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel now so you never miss another tale of healing friendship and the miraculous bond between animals and children that transcends the need for words. Emma's mother, Caroline, had tried everything: therapists, specialized programs, communication devices, expensive treatments, yet nothing had broken through the wall her daughter had built around herself. By age 7, Emma hadn't spoken a single word. In public for nearly 3 years, the specialists offered little hope, suggesting that some children simply never fully emerge from such profound communicative isolation. Caroline refused to believe them, stubbornly searching for something, anything, that might reach her daughter. The memories haunted Caroline at night, when Emma was finally asleep. How Emma had once been a chattery toddler, pointing at everything, naming colors, singing nursery rhymes. The transition hadn't happened suddenly. There was no single traumatic incident that doctors could identify, just a gradual retreat, first in preschool, then at home. Emma's words becoming fewer, her voice softer, until one day they simply stopped altogether, replaced by silence, so complete it seemed. To have its own presence in their home, Caroline watched her daughter through the office window as Dr. Lawrence, their 5th therapist in 2 years, attempted once again to establish some form of communication. Emma sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, eyes focused on the carpet, refusing the toy's communication board and tablet. The therapist offered each attempt met with the same resolute silence that had become Emma's only language. "She's regressing," Dr. Lawrence said later, his voice lowered as if Emma might somehow hear through the closed door. "I'm concerned about her development, her ability to form relationships later in life without intervention, in a more structured setting." "You mean institutionalization," Caroline said. "The word hanging between them like a guillotine. I mean a specialized residential program." Dr. Lawrence adjusted his glasses. "Where experts can work with her consistently in a controlled environment." Caroline felt her throat tighten. "No, absolutely not. She's 7 years old. She needs her home. She needs monitor." Lawrence sighed. "I understand your reluctance, but consider Emma's future, her quality of life. Children with severe selective mutism, combined with her other symptoms, they often struggle to ever fully integrate into society. School, employment, relationships all become nearly impossible." Caroline gathered Emma's coat and backpack. "We'll find another way," she said with more confidence than she felt. "There's someone out there who can reach her. I just haven't found them yet." The drive home passed in familiar silence, Emma staring out the window at the gray February landscape. Caroline's mind racing with diminishing options, their savings depleted by specialists and treatments, their insurance refusing to cover more sessions with Dr. Lawrence, Emma's school threatening to place her in a specialized classroom, away from the few familiar faces she tolerated. Caroline felt the weight of failure pressing down, making it difficult to breathe. That night, after tucking Emma into bed, Caroline opened her laptop, searching yet again for alternatives, treatment options, success stories, anything to kindle the hope flickering dimly within her. An article caught her attention about animal therapy specifically. Dogs trained to work with nonverbal children on the autism spectrum. The testimonials were compelling: children who had never spoken, beginning to communicate first with the dogs, then gradually with people around them. Caroline made notes her excitement. Growing then hesitated, remembering Dr. Marcus, the developmental specialist, who had laughed gently at her suggestion of music therapy. Some parents want to believe in miracle cures, he had said, but science doesn't support most alternative approaches. Carolyn had felt foolish, ashamed of her desperation. Then she felt the same doubt creeping in now the next morning. She called Dr. Lawrence, mentioning the animal therapy research. He dismissed it with professional certainty. The evidence is anecdotal. At best, he said, and Emma's case is particularly severe. I strongly recommend you reconsider the residential program. They have an opening next month. Defeated Caroline took Emma to Riverside Park after school. Needing fresh air and space to think, Emma walked beside her, silent as always, her small face expressionless. They sat on a bench, Caroline closing her eyes for just a moment, exhaustion catching up with her. When she opened them, an elderly woman had appeared on the adjacent bench. A golden retriever with graying muzzle sitting patiently at her feet. What a beautiful daughter, the woman said, her voice warm. You look just like each other. Same eyes, thank you, Caroline replied automatically. The social niceties she maintained, even as Emma remained unresponsive. The dog, a male by its size, watched Emma with calm interest, then slowly approached its movement, cautious, deliberate, stopping a few feet from Emma. The woman made no move to call it back, just watched with quiet attention. He's very gentle, the woman said. He won't hurt her. His name is Buddy. Caroline was about to pull Emma closer, a protective instinct, when she noticed something extraordinary. Emma was looking directly at the dog, not through it or past it as she did with people, but at it. Her eyes focused, interested. Buddy took another step forward, his movement slightly awkward. Caroline noticed the slight limp in his right hind leg, then stopped, waiting, his tail wagging gently. He had a rough start, the woman said, following. Caroline's gaze hit by a car as a puppy. Most people didn't want a dog with a permanent limp, but I think it just makes him more understanding of others who struggle. Caroline watched breathless as Emma's hand slowly uncurled from her side, reaching out, not quite touching, but extending toward the dog. Buddy moved forward just enough to bring his head beneath her fingers, the golden fur meeting Emma's skin in a connection that made Caroline's eyes fill with tears for the first time in years. Caroline saw something flicker in her daughter's eyes, a tiny spark of interest breaking through the fortress of silence the moment stretched between them. Emma, Buddy, the gray February sky, the sound of distant traffic, all suspended in the miracle of that simple touch. Excuse me, Caroline finally said, her voice trembling. May I ask where you found him? Your dog, I mean. Grace, she introduced herself. He's a rescue, she said, from Second Chance Shelter across town. I volunteer there every Wednesday. They were going to put him down. Nobody wanted a damaged dog. She gave Buddy a fond look, but sometimes what others see as broken is exactly what someone else needs. Carolyn couldn't stop thinking about the encounter with Buddy and Grace, the way Emma had reached out, the focus in her eyes, the moment of connection played on repeat in her mind as she researched long into the night service dogs. Therapy dogs, emotional support animals. The more she read, the more convinced she became that this might be their answer, until she saw the price tag: certified service dogs for autism or communication disorders, $15,000 to $3,000, waiting lists stretching 2 to 3 years, training periods requiring travel to specialized facilities, all impossibilities on her teacher's salary with their savings already depleted. She called Dr. Lawrence the next morning, her voice bright with possibility. Maybe we could try animal therapy before considering residential programs. She suggested there's research showing significant breakthroughs for nonverbal children. I'm familiar with the research, Dr. Lawrence replied, his tone measured. The results are inconsistent at best, and insurance won't cover experimental treatments. Besides, a service animal is an enormous responsibility requiring extensive training specific to the child's needs. Emma doesn't even engage with people. How would she manage with an animal? She did. Caroline insisted you didn't see her yesterday with that dog. She actually looked at him, reached out. Dr. Lawrence sighed audibly. Caroline, I understand you want to explore every option, but I strongly recommend against getting Emma's hopes up. With temporary solutions, the residential program has an excellent success rate. With cases like Emma's, they can provide the consistent, structured environment she needs. Caroline hung up, tears of frustration burning her eyes. Why couldn't anyone see that Emma needed connection, not institutionalization? She found Grace's number from their brief exchange and called. I was wondering, Caroline began after introductions, if I could ask you some questions about Buddy and the shelter you volunteer. Hot, of course, Grace replied. I'm headed there this afternoon if you'd like to come along. The Second Chance Animal Shelter occupied an old converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. The concrete exterior softened by colorful paw print murals and a small garden of resilient flowers. Caroline arranged for Emma to stay with her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, for a few hours. Knowing that bringing Emma into an environment with multiple unknown animals might overwhelm her inside the shelter was clean, but clearly operating on a minimal budget. The reception area displayed photos of successful adoptions, a board titled Happy Tales. Showing dogs and cats with their new families, Grace introduced Caroline to Marcus, the shelter director. A tall man, with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. Grace tells me you're interested in a therapy dog for your daughter, Marcus said, leading them to his small office, the walls covered with certificates and animal behavior textbooks. We don't typically handle service animal placement. That's a specialized process requiring specific breeding and training. Understand, Caroline replied. But after seeing how Emma responded to Buddy, I just thought, maybe I'm not necessarily looking for a certified service dog, just a companion who might help her feel safe enough to engage with the world. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I appreciate your situation, but I have to be honest. Placing a dog with a family, including a child with special needs, requires careful consideration. The last thing anyone wants is a failed adoption that traumatizes both the child and the animal. Caroline felt her hope dimming. Yes, of course, I wouldn't want that either. Grace, who had been quiet, touched Caroline's arm. Maybe tell him about Emma. Marcus has worked wonders matching dogs with special cases. Caroline described Emma's condition, the years of silence, the gradual withdrawal, the failed therapies, and finally the magical moment with Buddy, the first real connection she'd witnessed in years. Marcus listened intently, his expression softening. There is one dog, Marcus said, finally, more to Grace than Caroline. He's scheduled for evaluation tomorrow. We've had him 6 months, 3 failed adoptions. He's too anxious. With most adults unpredictable in new environments, I've been postponing a decision. But, Grace nodded. I know who you mean. The Golden Retriever Mix-Max. Marcus supplied found abandoned near the highway, severely undernourished, afraid of loud noises and sudden movements, but he's shown remarkable gentleness with the few children who visited, oddly enough, almost protective. Could I meet him? Caroline asked, her heart suddenly racing. Marcus hesitated. It's not our usual protocol. We typically require the whole family to meet a potential adoption, please, Caroline said, just to see if there might be a possibility before I get Emma's hopes up. Marcus relented, leading them through the kennels past barking dogs of all sizes and breeds to a quieter section at the back. Here he is, he said, stopping before a kennel at the end, the nameplate reading Max S. 2 years. Caroline peered in, expecting to see a golden retriever like Buddy, but Max was different. His coat lighter, more cream than gold, his frame leaner, his eyes amber rather than brown. He lay in the corner watching them warily, ears alert, body tense. He's beautiful, Caroline whispered. He was found tied to a guardrail. Marcus explained severely, malnourished with some evidence of physical abuse. He's recovered physically but remains distrustful of most adults, especially men. He's been returned 3 times for anxiety, behaviors, destructive chewing when left alone, growling at sudden movements. The last family called him untrainable. Yet with children, Caroline prompted different animal entirely. Marcus admitted there was a school group last month. He approached a little boy in a wheelchair, let the child pet him. When he wouldn't go near any adults, it was remarkable, like he sensed the child needed special treatment. But without proper training and structure, I'm concerned about his unpredictability. What happens if he's not adopted? Caroline asked. Already knowing the answer, Marcus looked away. We're not a no-kill shelter. We have limited resources. Difficult decisions sometimes have to be made, especially with animals deemed unadoptable. Max's evaluation is tomorrow. Our behaviorist will make the final recommendation. Caroline felt something shift inside her. The alignment of Emma and Max in her mind, both misunderstood, both running out of chances, both needing someone to look past their behaviors to see their potential. When does he go home? She asked. Marcus blinked. I'm sorry, if I were to adopt him, when could he come home? Caroline, Marcus began, you haven't even seen how he interacts with Emma. This isn't like buying a stuffed animal. This is a traumatized dog who may or may not be compatible with your daughter's needs. I understand, Caroline said, but I'd like to try. I can bring Emma. Tomorrow let them meet if it doesn't work. I won't pursue it, but please don't make any decisions about Max until then. Grace squeezed Caroline's hand supportively. Marcus sighed. Some would call it desperation. Others might call it maternal instinct. But Caroline knew this wasn't just about finding Emma a pet. This was about finding her a translator for a world she couldn't speak to. Bringing Emma to the shelter required careful preparation. Caroline explained in simple terms that they were going to meet a special dog, not promising anything beyond that single visit. Emma showed no reaction. Her face remained impassive, but she didn't resist getting into the car, which Caroline counted as tacit agreement. Marcus had arranged for them to use a quiet room away from the kennels to minimize sensory overload. Emma sat in the small chair, her legs dangling, not quite reaching. The floor, her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast in her familiar pose of withdrawal. Are you ready? Marcus asked Caroline, his hand on the door leading to the shelter's back area. As ready as we'll ever be, Caroline replied, her stomach tight with anxiety. What if this failed? What if Emma showed no interest in Max? What if the dog sensed her silence as rejection? Marcus disappeared, returning minutes later with Max on a leash. The dog entered cautiously, amber eyes scanning the room before focusing on Emma, his body language changing subtly, ears forward, tail lowering, not in fear, but in what Caroline recognized as careful approach. This is Max? Caroline said softly to Emma. He's a little nervous, meeting new people, just like you. Emma didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the dog's presence in any way. Marcus gave Caroline a concerned glance, but she shook her head, silently asking for patience. Max sat just inside the doorway, watching Emma with unblinking attention, a stillness settling over him that seemed almost unnatural for a young dog. After several minutes of this silent standoff, Max slowly rose and approached Emma, stopping a few feet away. He lowered himself to the ground belly against the cool tile head on his paws, eyes still fixed on Emma. He's making himself smaller, less threatening, Marcus whispered. That's unusual. He must sense something. They waited, Caroline forcing herself not to intervene, not to push Emma toward an interaction that should develop naturally if it was going to develop at all. The minutes stretched. Emma sitting, Max lying, neither moving, yet something indefinable building in the space between them. Finally, Emma's eyes lifted just slightly beneath her lashes. She looked at Max, then away, then back again longer. This time, Max inched forward on his belly, closing the gap between them. Stopping at Emma's feet, he rested his chin gently on her shoe, a touch so light it could hardly be felt yet. Emma didn't pull away, didn't stiffen as she did when people came too close into her carefully maintained bubble of isolation. I've never seen him approach someone so carefully, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. It's like he knows. Gradually over the next half hour, Emma's body relaxed incrementally, her shoulders lowering, her breathing deepening, her eyes more frequently meeting Max's steady gaze. When she finally extended her hand palm down toward his head, Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes. Max remained perfectly still, allowing Emma to set the pace of their introduction, her small fingers eventually making contact with the soft fur between his ears. "Can we take him home?" Caroline asked, not taking her eyes off the miraculous tableau before her. "There's paperwork." Marcus said, "Adoption. Fees a home check. I'll do whatever it takes," Caroline replied. Marcus nodded clearly, moved by what he had witnessed. "I'll get the forms started." Bringing Max home that evening felt like smuggling a mythical creature into their ordinary suburban house. Caroline had stopped at the pet store purchasing the essentials: bed food, bowls, toys, treats, a leash, and collar, struggling to keep her expectations realistic. Max might help Emma. He might not. The connection they'd witnessed might not translate to their home environment. Max entered cautiously, sniffing every corner, ears alert to unfamiliar sounds. Emma followed him at a distance, observing his exploration, her focus on the dog unwavering. Caroline showed Max his bed in the living room, filled. His water bowl explained the house rules to him, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to him as if he understood every word, yet somehow sensing that he did that first night. Caroline lay awake, listening for any signs of distress from either Emma or Max. Around midnight, she heard nails clicking on the hardwood floor, followed by silence. Concerned, she slipped from her bedroom to check, finding Max not in his new bed, but lying outside Emma's door, his body positioned across the threshold like a guardian. She considered moving him back to his bed, then thought better of it. Perhaps this was his way of establishing his role in their family. The morning brought the first challenge. Max refused to eat his breakfast, pacing anxiously by the front. Dr. whining softly. Emma watched from the kitchen table, her cereal untouched. "He's nervous," Caroline told her gently. "It's a new place, new people. He needs time to adjust, just like people do when things changes." If understanding her words, Max stopped, pacing, returning to sniff at his food bowl. He glanced at Emma, then back at the bowl. Seeming uncertain, Caroline was about to intervene when Emma slid from her chair, approaching the dog. She knelt beside him, not touching, just present. After a moment, Max began to eat Emma, watching the tension in his body easing with each bite. Caroline observed this silent communication, amazed at the understanding developing between them. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Max shadowing Emma throughout the house, positioning himself between her and the door when visitors arrived, the delivery man, the neighbor, even Caroline herself at times, as if he'd appointed himself Emma's personal guardian. Emma, for her part, seemed to relax incrementally in Max's presence, her vigilance easing, her body language softer. The first night Max slept in Emma's room happened without discussion or plan. Caroline simply found the dog's bed empty again, checking Emma's room to discover Max curled at the foot of her bed, Emma's hand resting on his back, both deeply asleep. Caroline stood in the doorway, torn between enforcing boundaries and acknowledging the comfort they clearly found in each other. She closed the door quietly, leaving them to their shared peace. Emma's school had been notified of Max's arrival, though Caroline had not yet broached the subject of bringing him to school one step at a time. She reminded herself not wanting to rush Emma's fragile progress. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly on a rainy Saturday morning. Caroline was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she noticed the house had gone too quiet. Hurrying to check on Emma, she stopped in the doorway of the living room, her heart catching at the sight. Emma sat on the floor, sheet of paper before her, colored pencils scattered around her. She was drawing. Max lay beside her, watching intently as the image took shape, a recognizable rendering of Max himself. His cream-colored coat, his amber eyes, his alert ears, the first voluntary creative expression Emma had produced in years. Max moved through the house like a silent guardian, always positioning himself between Emma and the door, as if he understood his job was to keep the world at bay until she was ready for it. 2 months transformed their home in ways Carolyn could never have anticipated. Max and Emma had developed a language of their own, a silent communion of gestures and glances. When Emma felt overwhelmed by sensory input, she would press her fingers to her temples, Max immediately positioning himself against her legs, creating steady pressure that seemed to ground her. When Max grew anxious during thunderstorms, Emma would sit beside him, her small hand resting on his back, both calming each other. Without words, Dr. Lawrence remained skeptical during their monthly check-ins, attributing any improvements to coincidence rather than Max's presence. He's simply a comfort object. Lawrence insisted no different than a stuffed animal or security blanket. The real work of communication still needs to be addressed, but Caroline saw the changes unfolding. Emma making eye contact more frequently, her body language more open, her willingness to try new experiences, expanding incrementally as long as Max accompanied her. The most significant breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday evening. As Caroline prepared dinner, Emma and Max in the living room, the house peaceful in its familiar routine. Then Caroline heard it so faint she thought she'd imagined it a whisper, Emma's voice rusty from disuse. She froze her hand suspended above the cutting board, straining to hear. Dropping the knife, she moved silently to the doorway, peering into the living room. Emma sat on the floor beside Max, her lips closed. To his ear-murmuring words, Carolyn couldn't distinguish the sight, so unexpected, so hoped for, that Carolyn had to press her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. She retreated to the kitchen, not wanting Emma to realize she'd been observed, knowing instinctively that this fragile communication needed protection from expectation or pressure. The words had been for Max alone, a private confidence shared between two beings who understood each other on a level beyond ordinary language. Caroline called Dr. Melissa Torres, the therapist recommended by Marcus, a specialist in animal-assisted therapy, explaining what she'd witnessed. "This is exactly what we hoped for," Dr. Torres said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Animals, especially dogs, provide a non-judgmental presence. They don't demand speech. They accept communication in whatever form it's offered. Children who feel unsafe speaking to humans often begin by speaking to animals. Can you see us this week?" Caroline asked the following Tuesday. Found them in Dr. Torres's office, a space deliberately designed to feel unlike a clinical setting. Comfortable furniture, soft lighting, shelves filled with books and toys. Emma sat on a cushion on the floor, Max beside her, while Caroline explained their journey. So far, Dr. Torres observed them, her expression thoughtful. "May I show Emma something?" she asked. Caroline nodded. Dr. Torres approached, slowly kneeling at a distance that wouldn't threaten Emma's space. She placed a series of cards on the floor between them, simple images, a dog, a house, a ball, a tree, a sun. "These are communication cards," she explained to Caroline, but also indirectly to Emma. "They help us share thoughts when words feel too difficult." Emma didn't look at the cards or at Dr. Torres. Her focus remained on Max, her fingers threaded through his fur. Dr. Torres didn't push. Instead, she demonstrated picking up the dog card, saying Max, then the ball card, asking, "Would Max like to play with a ball?" For several minutes, nothing happened. Dr. Torres continuing her gentle demonstration, Caroline trying not to let disappointment cloud her hope. Then Emma's hand moved not toward the cards but to tap Max's shoulder. The dog immediately alert to her touch, she pointed to the ball, card not picking it up but indicating it clearly. Max looked from Emma to the card, then to Dr. Torres. "Understands?" Dr. Torres said softly. "He's reading her intentions." She held out a small soft ball. Max looked at Emma as if seeking permission. Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, and Max moved forward, taking the ball gently in his mouth, returning to drop it in Emma's lap. A simple exchange that represented something profound by the end of the session. Emma was using the cards to communicate with Max pointing to images to express wants or needs, the dog responding with uncanny understanding. Dr. Torres explained that they would work on expanding this system gradually, adding more cards, creating sequences, building a bridge between Emma's internal world and the external one. This is remarkable progress, Dr. Torres told Caroline. As Emma and Max waited by the door ready to leave, most children take weeks to begin using the cards. Emma's already connecting intentions with symbols with Max as her interpreter. Over the following weeks, Emma's use of the communication cards expanded at home. Caroline created similar cards adding images specific to their daily life, Emma's favorite foods, activities, places. Gradually, Emma began using them not just with Max, but occasionally with Caroline herself, pointing to the bathroom card when she needed the toilet or the food card. At mealtimes, small steps that felt like giant leaps. The most unexpected development came when Max himself began retrieving cards, bringing them to Emma or Caroline, as if making his own requests or observations. The dog card followed by the door card when he needed to go outside the bed card at night. When he was tired, Emma would laugh, a near silent exhalation of breath, her eyes bright with understanding to everyone else. Emma's silence was a wall, but to Max, it was a door one he seemed to know exactly how to open. Caroline recorded these interactions, sharing them with Dr. Torres, who incorporated them into their therapy sessions. She's using him as a translator. Dr. Torres explained he bridges the gap between her internal and external worlds because he exists in both simultaneously. Do you think she'll ever speak aloud? Caroline asked the question that haunted her. Quiet nights, Dr. Torres considered, she's already speaking. Caroline, just not in the way most people recognize. Communication isn't only verbal. Emma has found her voice through Max. The question is whether she'll eventually feel safe enough to extend that communication to the wider world. Caroline brought the communication cards to Emma's school meeting with Mrs. Rivera. Emma's teacher to explain the system, Mrs. Rivera, a young woman with an innovative approach to education, was immediately supportive. Could incorporate similar cards into her classroom routine. She suggested create a station where Emma can express her needs or responses without verbal communication. What about Max? Caroline asked hesitantly. He's the key to how this works. Emma trusts him to interpret to protect him. Rivera's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Bringing a dog to school, that's complicated. Liability issues, allergies, school policy, but Caroline had seen the transformation Max had catalyzed in her daughter. She wasn't ready to compromise Emma's progress for institutional convenience. Surely there's precedent for service animals in educational settings. She pressed emotional support animals, therapy dogs. I can look into it, Mrs. Rivera promised, but I should warn you, our principal, Mr. Garrison, is very traditional, very concerned with regulations. I can't guarantee he'll approve. The meeting with Principal Garrison unfolded exactly as Mrs. Rivera had predicted. His office sterile and impersonal, populated with academic achievement plaques and district policy manuals. Caroline sat stiffly in the uncomfortable visitor's chair as he reviewed the documentation she'd provided from Dr. Torres about Emma's progress with Max and the communication card systems. Baker, he said, finally removing his glasses. Principal Garrison never used first names, maintaining a professional distance that bordered on coldness. While I appreciate the improvements you've observed at home, Riverwood Elementary simply cannot accommodate a dog on school premises, but he's helping her, Caroline protested. Emma's beginning to communicate through him. Surely that's worth making an exception. Garrison sighed. We have 600 students with varying needs, allergies, phobias, cultural restrictions regarding dogs, not to mention liability insurance considerations. What happens if the animal becomes aggressive? What happens if a child provokes it? The district policy is quite clear. Only certified service animals are permitted, and even those require extensive documentation, training, certification, liability coverage. Caroline felt her frustration. Mounting Max isn't officially certified, but he's functioning as a service animal for Emma. He's helping her engage with the world. Garrison slid a thick binder across the desk. This is the district policy regarding service animals, page 47. Section 12 clearly states that emotional support animals are not covered under accommodation requirements. Only animals trained to perform specific tasks related to a documented disability. Caroline flipped through the pages, desperation rising. Emma needs him. She's made more progress in 2 months with Max than in 3 years of conventional therapy. I'm sympathetic, Mrs. Baker. Truly, I am. Garrison's tone suggested otherwise. But if we make an exception for Emma, we open the floodgates to all manner of accommodation requests. My responsibility is to the entire student body. Caroline closed the binder with a snap, her patience evaporating. Emma is part of that student body. She deserves the same opportunity to learn as everyone else. Max helps her do that. Ems Rivera has already implemented the communication card system. Garrison countered that. Seems like a reasonable accommodation without introducing an animal into the equation. But the cards only work because Emma learned to use them with Max. Caroline insisted she trusts him. He's her bridge to communication. I'm sorry, my decision is final. Garrison stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Perhaps you might consider transferring Emma to the Specialized Learning Center. At Northside, they have more flexibility with alternative therapies. The Specialized Learning Center was a polite name for the district's facility for children with severe behavioral and developmental issues. Caroline had visited once, finding it institutional and depressing. She'd vowed Emma would never end up there. Leaving Garrison's office, Caroline felt defeated, stopping by Mrs. Rivera's classroom to update her on the situation. Mrs. Rivera's disappointment matched her own. I was afraid that would be his response, she admitted. Garrison's very by the book. What happens now? Caroline asked. Ems Rivera hesitated, then lowered her voice a little. Rebellion. Perhaps we could try a trial run. Bring Max for a short visit during my afternoon reading. Circle, it's just 8 students in a separate room. Garrison rarely checks. Caroline considered the risk. Weighed against Emma's needs. Thank you, she said gratefully. When tomorrow, Mrs. Rivera suggested, before more bureaucracy gets in the way. Come. At 2:30, use the side entrance by the playground. I'll meet you there. The following afternoon, Caroline took a half day from work, collecting Emma early from school. Driving home to get Max, then returning at the appointed time, her stomach tight. With nervous anticipation, Emma seemed to sense the significance of bringing Max to her classroom, her posture straighter, her eyes more alert than usual as they approached the side door of Riverwood Elementary. Mrs. Rivera was waiting as promised. Ushering them quickly inside, I prepared the other children. Caroline, she explained as they walked, we've been discussing helper animals all morning. They're excited to meet. Max, the small reading room was arranged in a circle of cushions, 7 children. Already seated, Mrs. Rivera had chosen Emma's regular classmates' children, familiar with her silence, accustomed to her presence. The introduction went more smoothly than Caroline had dared hope. Max entering, calmly staying close to Emma as the other. Children took turns offering gentle pats, following Mrs. Rivera's careful instructions. Emma sat on her usual cushion, Max beside her as Mrs. Rivera began the afternoon story. The children's attention split between the book and the golden retriever in their midst. Caroline observed from the corner, her heart swelling as Emma placed a tentative hand on Max's back, something she rarely did in the presence of others. The session progressed without incident, Emma even using one of her communication cards to answer a question about the story, a first in the classroom setting. Perhaps we could make this a regular? Caroline began as they prepared to leave when the door swung open. What is this? Garrison demanded, his voice sharp with authority. Monsieur Rivera, I explicitly denied permission for this animal. The children startled at his tone. Max immediately pressing against Emma's legs, sensing her spike of anxiety. Garrison's volume increasing as he continued. This is a direct violation of district policy. I could have you suspended for this. As Rivera Max's posture changed, subtly his ears flattening his body, tensing as Garrison approached Emma. Caroline moved to intervene, but not quickly enough. Garrison reached for Emma's arm, intending to separate her from Max. The dog let out a low, warning growl, not aggressive, but protective. Garrison jumped back. "That animal just threatened me," he said, his face flushing. "I want it removed from the premises immediately. I'm calling animal control." Caroline protested. "You startled him. He was protecting Emma. He's never shown aggression before." Garrison pulled out his phone. "I'm reporting this incident. The school board will need to be notified about this unauthorized animal on school grounds and its aggressive behavior." Rivera stepped forward. "Principal Garrison, please, this was my decision, my responsibility. Emma has made remarkable progress today. She actually participated in class discussion through her cards. Max made that possible." Garrison was unmoved. "The policy exists for a reason. The safety of all our students must come first. I'll need incident reports from everyone present. The board will determine appropriate actions." Caroline gathered Emma and Max, ushering them quickly out of the building, feeling the weight of Garrison's glare following them all the way to the car, Emma's body rigid with distress, Max still on alert. Sensing the tension at home, Caroline received the call she'd been dreading. Garrison informed her that Emma would not be allowed to return to school until a formal review could be conducted. The incident would be documented with both the district and animal control. Max would need to be evaluated for aggressive tendencies, a black mark potentially affecting his adoption status. The same world that demanded Emma speak was now silencing the only voice that had managed to reach her. Caroline thought bitterly as she hung up the phone. Max lay at Emma's feet in the living room, both watching her. With similar expressions of concern, she knelt beside them, fighting back tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We'll figure this out, I promise." Emma extended her hand, placing it over Caroline's, an unprecedented gesture of comfort. Then, to Caroline's astonishment, Emma reached for her communication cards, finding first the school card, then the no card, placing them side by side with deliberate intention. "School. No," she was saying in her own way. "We'll find another way," Caroline agreed, overcome by Emma's attempt to reassure her they can't take Max away from use. Emma nodded, her eyes holding Caroline's for a heartbeat longer than usual before returning to the safety of Max's presence. Dr. Bennett's involvement accelerated everything. In the 2 weeks that followed, he conducted formal assessments of Max, documenting specific behaviors that qualified as service tasks. The pressure therapy Max provided during Emma's moments of sensory overload, his retrieval of communication cards, his alerting to emotional distress. Caroline watched in amazement as Dr. Bennett methodically built a case for Max as a legitimate service animal, compelling enough to satisfy even the most stringent interpretation of school district policy. Emma continued homeschooling during this period, Caroline taking emergency leave from her teaching position to stay home, Mrs. Rivera sending classwork and visiting twice to check on Emma's progress. Dr. Torres incorporated Dr. Bennett's findings into her therapy approach, the 4 adults forming an unexpected alliance around Emma and Max have completed the formal evaluation Dr. Bennett announced at their final assessment session, producing official-looking documents with university letterhead and certification seals. Max has successfully demonstrated all requirements for service animal status, specifically for emotional support and communication facilitation. These documents establish his legal standing. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Caroline accepted the papers with trembling hands. Does this mean the school has to accept him? Dr. Bennett's expression was cautiously optimistic. The law is on your side, but bureaucracy rarely surrenders. Without a fight, I've scheduled a meeting with your superintendent, Dr. Monroe, bypassing Principal Garrison entirely. Dr. Monroe has final authority over Garrison's decisions and a reputation for being more progressive. The meeting was set for Friday morning. Emma would stay with Mrs. Jenkins as usual. Max accompanying Carolyn and Dr. Bennett to the district offices. Caroline barely slept the night before, rehearsing arguments, in her head reviewing documentation, packing and repacking the folder. Of evidence, the morning arrived foggy and cool. Caroline dressed carefully, choosing professional attire, wanting to project competence and determination rather than the desperation she felt inside. The district administration building stood like a fortress of concrete and glass, intimidating in its institutional authority. Dr. Bennett met her in the parking lot, his presence reassuring as they entered together, guided to a conference room where Superintendent Monroe awaited them, a tall woman with dark hair streaked with silver, her handshake firm, her eyes evaluating. "Thank you for meeting with us," Caroline began, but Dr. Monroe raised a hand. Stopping her before we begin, she said, "I should inform you that Principal Garrison has also been invited to this meeting. He should be here momentarily." Caroline felt her confidence falter. Garrison's hostility would complicate matters significantly. Dr. Bennett placed a steadying hand on her arm. "We welcome Principal Garrison's input," he said smoothly. "Our goal is resolution, not confrontation." Garrison arrived minutes later. His surprise at seeing Dr. Bennett evident in his stiffened posture and tight smile. Once seated, Dr. Monroe opened the discussion. "Understand we have a situation regarding a service animal for Emma Baker." She began, her tone neutral. "Principal Garrison has expressed concerns about safety and policy compliance, while Mrs. Baker believes the animal provides essential support for her daughter's disability." Garrison immediately launched into his argument. "The animal showed aggressive behavior toward me," he insisted, "and lacks proper certification. We have strict policies regarding animals on school premises for the safety of all students." Dr. Bennett waited for Garrison to finish before responding. "Actually, Superintendent Monroe, the dog Max has now received full certification as a service animal for Emma Baker." He slid the documentation across the table. "I've personally conducted his evaluation and can attest that the incident Principal Garrison describes was not aggression, but appropriate protective behavior within service animal guidelines." Garrison's face flushed. "That's convenient," he said dismissively, "bringing in an outside expert after the fact my credentials." Dr. Bennett replied calmly, his voice never rising, "Include 30 years of service animal evaluation, published research in peer-reviewed journals, and expert testimony in federal cases establishing precedent for service animals in educational settings." Monroe examined the documentation carefully, asking pointed questions about Max's specific tasks, his training, Emma's diagnosis. Dr. Bennett answered each query with professional precision, Garrison growing increasingly uncomfortable as the discussion continued. "The law is clear," Superintendent Dr. Bennett concluded. "Service animals must be accommodated in public institutions, including schools, when they perform specific tasks mitigating a documented disability. Max meets all these criteria." Garrison's interrupted, "But the disruption to other students, the potential liability." Dr. Monroe held up a hand. "I've read the reports from Mrs. Rivera about Emma's progress. When Max was briefly in the classroom, she noted increased engagement participation through the communication card system and no negative reactions from other students. Is that accurate, Mrs. Bakery?" Caroline confirmed the other children were fascinated but respectful. Max remained calm, focused entirely on Emma after nearly an hour of discussion. Dr. Monroe closed her folder. "I believe I have sufficient information to make a determination," she announced, "given the documentation provided and the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Riverwood Elementary will accommodate Max as Emma's service animal with certain conditions." Caroline held her breath as Dr. Monroe outlined the conditions Max must wear. Service identification. At all times remain with Emma in designated areas, follow all commands reliably, and undergo quarterly behavior assessments. Caroline and Emma would participate in an education program for the other students about service animals and appropriate interaction. Dr. Bennett would provide additional training to staff Principal Garrison. Dr. Monroe continued, "Your concerns for student safety are noted, but the law is clear. We must provide reasonable accommodation. Emma Baker has the right to equal access to education with her service animal. You will implement these accommodations beginning Monday, Garrison's." Jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly, understanding dismissal when he heard it as he left the room. Carolyn released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said to Dr. Monroe. "I'm not doing you a favor, Mrs. Baker?" Dr. Monroe replied simply, "I'm following." The law Dr. Bennett's documentation is impeccable. The benefits to your daughter are well documented. We should be thanking you for your persistence in advocating for Emma's needs. The victory, however hard-won, was only the beginning, Caroline discovered the following Monday as she brought Emma and Max to school. For the first time since the incident, Garrison had technically complied with Dr. Monroe's directive, but with obvious reluctance positioning Emma's desk near the door, restricting Max to a small mat beside her, requiring them to use a side entrance rather than the main hallway where other students gathered. Rivera did her best to counter Garrison's passive resistance, making Emma and Max feel welcome, encouraging positive interaction. With classmates, most of the children adapted quickly, some even bringing small drawings or notes for Emma, placing them on her desk without demanding response, accepting her communication cards as a valid form of participation. Emma remained tense, but Max's presence kept her regulated his warm body against her legs, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. The first true crisis came unexpectedly during a fire drill, the sudden blaring alarm sending Emma into sensory overload, her hands clamping over her ears, body rigid with panic. Max immediately pressed against her, providing deep pressure therapy, guiding her toward the exit when she seemed unable to move, following Mrs. Rivera's class to the designated safe zone while Garrison watched with narrow-eyed attention, clearly hoping for a disruption that would justify his concerns. Instead, Max demonstrated exactly why Emma needed him, maintaining calm vigilance as she gradually regulated her breathing, his presence transforming what might have been a meltdown into a manageable stress response. Even Garrison couldn't deny the evidence before him. Though he made no comment, exhausted from the emotional strain, Emma fell asleep on the drive home, Max watching her from the adjacent seat. Caroline glanced at them in the rearview mirror, feeling both triumph and trepidation. They had won this battle, but at what cost? The strain on Emma was evident. The scrutiny from Garrison unrelenting, the daily navigation of a system not designed for children like Emma, requiring constant vigilance and advocacy. Caroline's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. Dr. Bennett's name appearing on the display, she answered quietly. Mindful of Emma sleeping in the back seat, "How did it go?" he asked, complicated. Caroline replied, "We're in, but it's not exactly welcoming." Dr. Bennett's sigh was audible. Institutional change never is, but each child like Emma who breaks through these barriers makes it easier for the next one. Max is doing well. "He's amazing," Caroline said, glancing again at the rearview mirror. "But I worry about Emma, the stress of all this attention." Bennett was quiet for a moment before responding. "I received a call from a reporter today. He said someone at the school board leaked the story about Emma and Max. They want to interview you, possibly feature Emma's story." "A reporter?" Caroline echoed, her stomach nodding with anxiety. "No, absolutely not. Emma can barely handle school right now. Media attention would be devastating. I declined on your behalf," Dr. Bennett assured her. "But you should be aware. The story may run anyway. Public records of the superintendent's decision, school board minutes. They're pursuing it as a human interest piece about service animals in education." Caroline gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Can they do that without our permission?" "They can't interview Emma without parental consent," Dr. Bennett explained. "But they can report on the case, especially since it involves public policy. Some publicity might actually help protect Emma from Garrison's resistance." make it harder for him to create obstacles. Caroline glanced again at Emma, still asleep, her face peaceful. For the first time that day, "I'll think about it," she said, not committing. The decision was made for her the following week, when a local news website published a brief article titled "Silent Child Finds Voice Through Service Dog." The piece contained minimal details about Emma herself, focusing instead on the legal precedent and policy implications, but included a quote from an unnamed school board member describing the case as potentially disruptive to the educational environment. Caroline recognized Garrison's phrasing immediately. The article generated unexpected support. Mrs. Rivera reported several parents calling the school, expressing encouragement for Emma. And Max, a local service dog training organization, reached out offering free additional training sessions. Community members left small gifts in their mailbox: dog treats, handmade cards, encouraging notes for both Emma and Caroline. Then came the email from Melissa Jordan, a producer at the regional news station, requesting an interview. Her message emphasizing the positive impact Emma's story could have on other families struggling with similar challenges. The opportunity to raise awareness about selective mutism and animal-assisted therapy. Caroline's finger hovered over the delete button when Dr. Torres called. "I saw the news article," she said before Caroline could speak. "This could be an opportunity not just for Emma, but for other children like her. I'm not using my daughter to promote a cause," Caroline replied, her voice sharper than intended. "She's not a poster child. She's a little girl who can barely handle regular school." Torres' voice softened. "I understand your protective instinct, Caroline, but consider this. Controlling the narrative is sometimes better than letting others tell your story incorrectly. A well-managed interview with a sympathetic reporter could actually benefit Emma how Caroline demanded, by helping people understand, by reducing the stares and whispers, by showing that her connection with Max isn't just a mother's indulgence, but a recognized therapeutic approach. Dr. Torres paused. "In my experience, visibility often leads to acceptance, silence to fear, and misunderstanding." Caroline remained unconvinced, but agreed to discuss the possibility with Dr. Bennett and Mrs. Rivera. They met the following afternoon at Dr. Torres' office while Emma attended a therapy session with Max in the adjoining room through the observation window. Caroline could see Emma arranging communication cards on the floor, Max watching attentively. "If we consider an interview," Dr. Bennett said, "it would need strict parameters, controlled environment, no direct questions to Emma, pre-approved topics." Rivera nodded. The educational aspect could be beneficial for the whole school, reducing curiosity and potential teasing if handled sensitively. Caroline watched Emma through the window, vulnerability and strength intertwined in her small frame. What would Emma want if she could express it? Would she prefer to remain invisible, or would she want her story understood? "I need to think about it," Caroline said finally, rising to join Emma's session. That weekend, Caroline created a social story for Emma, a simplified explanation with pictures showing what an interview might involve, what questions might be asked, how Emma could participate or not. As she felt comfortable using her communication cards, with Max's support, she presented it without pressure, simply as information. After reviewing it together, Emma surprised Caroline by selecting the yes card, then the help card, then pointing to Max Yoyu. "Want to do this with Max's help?" Caroline clarified. Emma nodded. "Are you sure?" Caroline pressed. "It might be scary." Lots of attention. Emma considered this, then deliberately chose the scared card, followed by the brave card. Her message clear: yes, she was scared but wanted to be brave. Caroline hugged her gently, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's courage. Interview was arranged for the following Thursday in their home. Melissa Jordan, proving to be thoughtfully prepared, having researched selective mutism and service animals before arriving, she spoke directly to Emma without expecting verbal responses, accepted the communication card system without comment, and maintained a respectful distance from Max, Understanding his working role, Dr. Bennett attended as well, providing expert context. Emma remained close to Max throughout the session, using her cards to answer simple questions about their daily routine, her favorite activities with Max, how he helped her feel safe at school when she felt overwhelmed. She even shared through careful card selection that Max understood her when others didn't. Segment aired the following Tuesday, a 4-minute feature, sensitively edited, showing Emma and Max's communication system, Dr. Bennett explaining the science behind animal-assisted therapy, brief comments from Dr. Torres about selective mutism, the focus remaining on education and understanding. Rather than spectacle, Carolyn watched with Emma on her lap, Max beside them, her anxiety giving way to relief as the piece concluded with a simple message about different forms of communication and connection. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Caroline's email filled with messages from parents of children with similar challenges requesting information about animal therapy. Resources. Dr. Bennett reported increased inquiries to his university program. Mrs. Rivera shared that several teachers had requested information about implementing communication card systems in their classrooms. Even Garrison grudgingly acknowledged the positive response from parents, though he remained skeptical about long-term implementation. Not everyone was supportive. One morning, Caroline found an anonymous note in their mailbox. Kids with problems belong in special schools, not disrupting normal classrooms. Days later, a complaint was filed with animal control claiming Max had been seen running unleashed in their neighborhood, though he had never been outside their fenced yard without his leash. The animal control officer who responded was apologetic, explaining they were required to investigate all complaints but finding no evidence of any violation. The school environment shifted subtly following the news segment. Children approached Emma with greater understanding, some even bringing communication cards they had made at home to share. With her, several parents organized a presentation about service animals for the school. Garrison, maintaining his distance but unable to interfere with parent-led initiatives, Emma still struggled with overwhelming days, still relied heavily on Max for regulation, but the burden of being completely misunderstood had lightened slightly. The most significant change came from Emma herself. One evening, as Carolyn helped her prepare for bed, Emma reached for her communication cards, selecting home, school, and like cards, arranging them deliberately, then adding Max and friends. You like school? Now, Caroline asked carefully. Emma nodded, then selected the card showing a classroom of Rivera's class. Emma nodded again, then hesitated before selecting the help card, followed by the card showing a child talking. You want help? Talking? Caroline clarified, heart racing. Emma nodded, her expression serious. Determined, Caroline sat beside her on the bed. Tell me more. She encouraged. Emma selected cards methodically, building her longest message. Yet I want to try talking to Mrs. Rivera, with Max helping. The next morning, Carolyn was researching homeschooling options. When her phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen, she answered, hesitantly expecting another official from the school district. Instead, a deep voice introduced itself as Dr. Robert Bennett, veterinary behaviorist and animal-assisted therapy specialist. Mrs. Rivera suggested, I call you. The voice continued, I understand you're having some difficulties with school accommodation for your daughter's companion animal. Caroline nearly dropped the phone in surprise. Yes, that's right. She managed to respond. Perhaps we could meet Dr. Bennett. Suggested I might be able to offer some assistance in your situation. They arranged to meet that afternoon at a small cafe near Caroline's workplace. Emma safely at home with Mrs. Jenkins and Max, Caroline arrived early, nervousness making her fidget with her coffee cup when Dr. Bennett entered. She was surprised by his appearance, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. Dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, not at all the stuffy academic she had expected. Thank you for meeting me, Caroline began after introductions. I'm not sure exactly how you can help, but at this point, I'm willing to try anything. Dr. Bennett nodded, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Rivera gave me a brief overview of your situation. He said, your daughter, Emma, has selective mutism, possibly on the autism spectrum, and has formed a significant bond with a rescue dog named Max, who's facilitating communication. But the school won't allow him on premises without certification. Is that accurate? Precisely? Caroline confirmed, feeling a rush of relief at his concise understanding. They're claiming he showed aggression toward the principal, but he was only protecting Emma. When the principal startled her, Dr. Bennett smiled gently. I've worked with many similar cases in my 30 years of practice. Dogs are remarkably intuitive, especially with children experiencing communication challenges. What Max did sounds like appropriate protective behavior, not aggression. So you believe me? Caroline felt tears threatening her composure. No one else seems to. Dr. Bennett's expression softened. Of course I do. I've dedicated my career to studying and documenting these connections. Mrs. Rivera mentioned that Max has helped Emma begin using communication cards, even occasionally, whispering to him that's precisely the type of breakthrough we hope for in animal-assisted therapy. But the school won't acknowledge it, Carolyn said. Bitterly, they've threatened to report Max to animal control if I bring him back. They suggested moving Emma to a specialized facility. Dr. Bennett's face darkened. I'm familiar with those facilities. They're often underfunded, understaffed, and rely heavily on medication rather than innovative therapies. He leaned forward. Would you be open to allowing me to evaluate Emma and Max together? I'm certified to assess service animals and could potentially provide the documentation the school requires. Caroline hardly dared to hope. Would the school accept your evaluation? As chair of the Animal-Assisted Therapy Program at Eastern State University and consultant to the American Service Dog Association, they'd have difficulty dismissing it. Dr. Bennett's smile was right. I've testified in court cases, establishing precedent for service animals in educational settings. When can you start? Caroline asked. Dr. Bennett observed Emma and Max together the following day at their home. Caroline had explained his visit to Emma through the communication cards, prepared her for a visitor who wanted to see how she and Max worked together. Emma was understandably tense at first, but Dr. Bennett's calm, undemanding presence gradually put her at ease. He sat on the floor, at a respectful distance, observing as Emma and Max demonstrated their communication system. Remarkable. Dr. Bennett murmured as Max retrieved specific cards based on subtle cues from Emma, bringing them to her or to Caroline. He's not just responding to commands, he's interpreting her intentions. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone, Caroline said. He understands her in ways none of us can. Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. May I try something? He asked Caroline. When she agreed, he took out several unfamiliar cards from his bag. Pictures Emma and Max hadn't seen before, placing them on the floor. Can you ask Emma to show Max something new? Something he hasn't seen before? He instructed Caroline, relayed the request through their established communication system. Emma studied the new cards for a long moment before pointing to one showing a red ball. Max looked from Emma to the card, then to Dr. Bennett, then around the room. He's looking for the object. Dr. Bennett said with quiet excitement. He understands. The card represents something real. May I? He produced a small red ball from his pocket, holding it up. Max immediately approached, tail wagging. This is beyond simple association, Dr. Bennett explained. This is symbolic understanding. Max comprehends that the image stands for the object, and that Emma's interest in the image indicates she wants him to find the object. That's cognitive processing at the level of some primates after 2 hours of observation. Dr. Bennett sat with Caroline at the kitchen table. While Emma and Max rested in the living room, I've seen enough to make an initial assessment. He said Max is functioning as a service animal for Emma. By any reasonable definition, he facilitates communication, assists with emotional regulation, provides pressure therapy during anxiety and alerting behaviors when she's distressed, These are specific trained tasks that mitigate Emma's disability, but he's not officially trained, Caroline pointed out. Dr. Bennett smiled. Sometimes the most effective service animals are self-taught. He explained or developed their skills through natural interaction with their handlers. Max may not have gone through a formal program, but his behaviors are consistent with certified service animals. I've evaluated. He removed a folder from his bag. I'd like to start official documentation for him as Emma's service animal, including a formal behavior assessment. This would satisfy the school's requirement for certification. Caroline felt hope returning for the first time since the school incident. How long will that take? We can complete the initial evaluation. Today, Dr. Bennett said, follow-up assessments over the next 2 weeks. Then certification. The school district will have little ground to stand on. Once we've established Max's status legally, as Dr. Bennett continued explaining the process, Caroline learned more about him, discovering that his dedication to animal-assisted therapy stemmed from personal tragedy. His own son, Michael, had been diagnosed with autism at age 4, becoming increasingly withdrawn, until a neighbor's dog formed an unexpected bond with him. The dog had alerted the family when Michael wandered away from home one night, potentially saving his life. Michael never spoke. Dr. Bennett shared his voice, softening with memory, but through that dog, he communicated. He connected. When Michael took his own life at 16, the dog stopped eating, died a week later. I went back to school, studied veterinary medicine, animal behavior, made it my mission to understand and document these extraordinary connections. I'm so sorry, Caroline whispered. Dr. Bennett nodded. I couldn't save my son, but I can help make sure other children have the support they need. The understanding, he wiped his eyes with a quick gesture. Emma's connection with Max is exceptional. I won't let bureaucracy interfere with something so vital. By the end of their meeting, Dr. Bennett had completed preliminary evaluation forms for Max, provided Caroline with documentation for the school, and scheduled follow-up assessments. He left them with a sense of purpose and hope that had been missing since the confrontation with Principal Garrison. The Metropolitan Conference Center bustled with activity. Educators, administrators, service providers gathering for the annual District Special Education Symposium. Caroline checked the program nervously, confirming their session time and location. Emma sat beside her in the waiting area, Max lying at her feet, both wearing matching navy blue bandanas emblazoned with Communication Advocate. In white letters, Dr. Bennett and Mrs. Rivera nearby, reviewing their presentation notes. One last time. 3 months had passed since Emma first expressed her desire to speak to Mrs. Rivera. A journey of small, cautious steps forward, occasional steps back, and unexpected breakthroughs. The first whispered hello to her teacher had been so soft. Mrs. Rivera had asked her to repeat it, thinking she'd imagined it. The second attempt, slightly louder, had brought tears to the teacher's eyes. Emma's voice rusty from disuse but unmistakably present. Max had stayed pressed against her legs throughout that momentous exchange, as if lending her his strength. Dr. Torres had helped them develop a gradual exposure plan. Emma practicing speaking aloud with Max, present first at home, then in therapy sessions, then with Mrs. Rivera, in an empty classroom after school each. Success, building confidence for the next attempt. Her vocabulary expanding from single words to short phrases, always with Max as her security, her interpreter, her bridge. Caroline marveled at the transformation, not just in Emma's communication, but in her entire demeanor, the way she held herself, the eye contact fleeting but real. The subtle changes that spoke of a child emerging from isolation. Principal Garrison remained skeptical, maintaining professional distance, monitoring Max's behavior with unnecessary scrutiny. But even he had been forced to acknowledge Emma's progress in the most recent IEP meeting, grudgingly approving continued accommodations for Max. With minimal resistance, Superintendent Monroe had taken a more active interest, visiting the classroom several times, requesting updates on Emma's communication development, considering broader applications of animal-assisted therapy within the district. The symposium presentation had been Dr. Bennett's idea, an opportunity to share Emma's journey with educators across the district, potentially influencing policy and practice for other children with similar challenges. Caroline had hesitated, worried about exposing Emma to such public scrutiny. But Emma herself had selected. The yes card when asked, followed by the help others cards, a clarity of purpose that had stunned Caroline. Bennett had structured the presentation carefully, beginning with the science of animal-assisted therapy, followed by Mrs. Rivera discussing classroom implementation, practical strategies, observable outcomes. Finally, Caroline would share the parent perspective, the daily realities, the challenges and triumphs. Emma and Max would demonstrate their communication system, but Emma wouldn't be expected to speak if she wasn't comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. Simply presence. A symposium coordinator approached, clipboard in hand. "You're up in 5 minutes?" she said, leading them toward the large conference room, already filling with educators, administrators, therapists. Caroline's heart raced at the sight of the audience, larger than she'd anticipated. Emma's hand found hers, squeezing briefly before returning to Max's. For an unexpected reassurance, Caroline took the stage after Dr. Bennett and Mrs. Rivera completed their portions, adjusting the microphone nervously before beginning. "Thank you all for being here today," she said, her teacher's voice steadier than she felt. "I'm going to share our family's journey with selective mutism animal-assisted therapy and the power of alternative communication. My daughter Emma is 7 years old, and until recently she hadn't spoken aloud in public for over 3 years. She recounted their story, the frustrations, the failed therapies, the chance encounter with Buddy that led them to Max, the battles with school administration, the gradual breakthroughs, the daily challenges they still faced. Throughout her speech, Emma and Max sat quietly at the side of the stage, Emma listening intently, Max watching her with characteristic attentiveness. "I want to emphasize," Caroline continued, "that our journey isn't finished. Selective mutism doesn't disappear overnight. Emma still struggles with verbal communication, in many situations still relies heavily on her communication cards and on Max's support, but she's making progress every day, finding her voice in ways that work for her. Our goal isn't to force her into conventional communication patterns, but to help her connect with the world on terms that feel safe." She gestured toward Emma and Max. "Now I'd like to demonstrate how Emma uses her communication system with Max." The cards in front of her represent questions we've prepared in advance. Emma will decide which ones she wants to answer and how she'd like to respond, either through her cards or with Max's assistance. Emma approached with Max beside her, kneeling by the table of communication cards Dr. Bennett had arranged. She selected one that read, "What does Max help you with most at school?" holding it up for the audience to see. Then carefully arranged response cards reading, "Feel safe when scared and help friends understand me." Caroline translated for the audience, though many educators familiar with communication cards were already nodding and understanding. Emma continued, selecting another question card. "How does Max know when you need help?" She paused, considering, then selected the heart card, followed by the connection card, Max moving closer as if responding to some invisible signal between them. For the final demonstration, Caroline explained, Emma has chosen a question that she will answer in her own way. The card Emma selected read, "What would you like teachers to know about kids who don't talk much?" Emma looked at it for a long moment, then whispered something to Max, her hand in his fur, her face turned away from the microphone. From the audience, the room had gone completely silent, every educator leaning forward, trying to catch her words. Caroline was about to step in to translate when Emma suddenly stood straighter and turned toward the audience. Max pressing reassuringly against her legs, his body language alert, protective. She stepped toward the microphone, hesitated, Then spoke her voice. Small but clear enough to carry, we understand everything, she said. We just need more time and different ways to answer. A collective intake of breath swept the room, followed by absolute stillness. Emma's words landing like pebbles in still water, creating ripples of understanding. Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes as Emma stepped back from the microphone, returning to Max's side, the dog's tail wagging gently in apparent approval. Dr. Bennett moved smoothly to the podium, thanking Emma and transitioning to the Q&A session, giving her space to recover from the enormous effort. The questions came rapidly. Practical inquiries about funding, training, accessibility, Caroline answering some, Mrs. Rivera, others Dr. Bennett, providing clinical context throughout. Emma remained beside Max, occasionally nodding or shaking her head in response to specific points, but not speaking again. The single sentence having exhausted her verbal resources for the day. As the session concluded, educators approached with business cards, questions, offers of collaboration. Emma retreated to a quiet corner with Max while Caroline navigated the professional networking. Superintendent Monroe appeared. Her expression thoughtful. I'd like to discuss expanding this program, she said. To Carolyn and Dr. Bennett, perhaps a pilot initiative across several schools. Caroline nodded, grateful, but distracted her attention, drawn to Emma, who had been joined by a small girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, the child's mother watching nervously. Nearby, the little girl wasn't speaking, Caroline noticed, but was showing Emma a drawing, pointing to different parts with animation. Emma was nodding, listening with an intensity. Caroline recognized Max, positioned between them, creating a safe space for this wordless exchange. The symposium created ripples beyond anything Caroline had anticipated. Superintendent Monroe announcing a district-wide initiative for animal-assisted therapy pilot programs in 3 schools, funding for staff training, development of policies, and procedures for incorporating service animals into educational environments. Emma and Max had become unofficial ambassadors, Dr. Bennett bringing them to teacher training sessions where Emma demonstrated their communication system, answered carefully. Prepared questions, sometimes with cards, sometimes with whispered words, always with Max by her side as spring arrived, bringing warmer days, longer evenings. Carolyn noticed subtle shifts in their home life, Emma initiating activities rather than responding passively, requesting specific books at bedtime, expressing preferences through a combination of cards, simple phrases, and gestures. The communication expanding every week, Max still central to these interactions, but Emma gradually becoming more independent, the dog watching with what Caroline could only interpret as pride, as his young charge found her voice in multiple forms. His Jenkins next door remarked on the change. You know, she asked me about my roses yesterday, Caroline pointed out the window to where Emma knelt in the garden. Max, nearby, examining a butterfly with careful attention. Not just with those card things, but actual words. Quiet but clear as anything, wanted to know what makes them smell so good. Principal Garrison remained the lone holdout in Emma's growing circle of support, maintaining professional distance, monitoring Max's presence with barely concealed skepticism, until the morning a fire broke out in the school cafeteria. Not a drill, but actual smoke, billowing through hallways, alarms blaring, chaos erupting, as teachers tried to organize evacuation. Emma had been in the bathroom when it started, separated from her class, from Mrs. Rivera. From familiar procedures, panic might have immobilized her. If not for Max, the dog finding her, guiding her through the confusion to the nearest exit, staying pressed against her side. As they joined the crowd of students in the designated safe area, Garrison witnessed the dog's unwavering focus, the way Max had navigated Emma through potential trauma, how he'd alerted a teacher to Emma's presence, ensuring she wasn't overlooked in the head count. The following day, he appeared at Caroline's classroom doorway, his usual stiff demeanor slightly softened. Observed Max yesterday during the fire incident. He said his performance was exemplary. Thank you. Caroline replied, surprised by the unexpected acknowledgement. Garrison hesitated. I've been researching other districts implementing similar programs. He continued reviewing outcome data success metrics. It appears there may be broader applications than I initially recognized. Caroline recognized the closest thing to an apology Garrison was capable of offering. I appreciate your open-mindedness. She said, he's made all the difference for Emma. I'm recommending expansion of the program. Garrison said establishing protocols for other students who might benefit proper training assessment. Obviously, Dr. Bennett's expertise would be instrumental. The school board meets next month to review budget allocations for next year. Caroline absorbed this unexpected alliance. Thank you, she said simply. Garrison nodded once briskly before turning to leave, then paused. She's doing well. He said, your daughter. The progress is remarkable. Then he was gone, leaving Caroline staring after him, wondering at the subtle shifts that had brought them to this moment of tentative understanding. The school board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. Emma would stay with Mrs. Jenkins as usual. Caroline prepared her presentation carefully. Statistics, research outcomes, cost projections. Knowing the financial considerations would ultimately drive decisions. Despite the compelling personal stories she could share, Dr. Bennett would present the clinical data. Mrs. Rivera, the classroom implementation, Superintendent Monroe had expressed support, but the final decision rested with the board, many of whom remained skeptical about allocating funds for what some considered experimental approaches. The meeting room was already crowded when Caroline arrived. Parents, teachers, administrators, community members filling the seats, lining the walls, an unusually high attendance for a budget meeting. Superintendent Monroe acknowledged her with a nod as Caroline took her place beside Dr. Bennett and Mrs. Rivera, the agenda proceeding through routine matters before reaching the proposal for expanding animal-assisted therapy programs. Caroline was just organizing her notes when the door at the back of the room opened. She glanced up reflexively, then froze in disbelief. Emma stood in the doorway, Max beside her, wearing his service vest. Mrs. Jenkins hovering uncertainly behind them. Caroline half rose from her seat, confused. Emma was supposed to be safely at home, protected from the stress of public scrutiny, the political maneuvering of school district politics. Emma's eyes scanned the room, finding Caroline, then moved with determination toward the front, Max matching her pace perfectly, the assembled board members watching with curiosity as this small girl with her golden dog approached the podium. Caroline met her halfway, kneeling to eye levels. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" she whispered. Emma reached into her pocket, producing a folded paper, smoothing it carefully before handing it to Caroline. Written in Emma's careful printing were the words, "I want to tell them myself." Caroline's heart raced. "Are you sure this is a lot of people, a lot of attention?" Emma nodded, her expression serious, determined. Mrs. Jenkins explained apologetically from nearby. She insisted, "Caroline, she had the whole thing planned out. Made me call an Uber and everything. I didn't know what to do except come with her." Superintendent Monroe approached the situation. "What's happening here?" she asked. "My daughter would like to address the board." Caroline explained, her voice unsteady with emotion, about the therapy dog program. Monroe considered this unusual, but not prohibited, she said finally. "If she feels capable, the floor is hers after your presentation." Emma shook her head, firmly pointing to the schedule. Now Caroline translated, understanding her daughter's intention. If she waited, her courage might falter. The momentum lost. Monroe nodded in understanding. Addressing the board members, "We have an unscheduled speaker, Emma Baker, who would like to address the Therapy Dog Initiative." The board chair, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, nodded her assent. Caroline squeezed Emma's shoulder reassuringly before returning to her seat, heart pounding as Emma approached the podium, too short to reach the microphone. Superintendent Monroe adjusting it downward, Max positioning himself pressed against Emma's legs, his presence steady, calming the room, falling silent. As this small girl who had once been completely nonverbal stood before them, Emma placed her communication cards on the podium, arranging them carefully. But then, to Caroline's astonishment, set them aside, instead unfolding a small paper from her pocket. She took a deep breath, Max looking up at her with what seemed like encouragement, and began to speak, her voice soft but clear. In the hushed room, "My name is Emma Baker," she said. "I didn't talk for 3 years." Her fingers twisted in Max's fur, grounding herself. "But I always understood everything. I just couldn't make words come out." It felt scary, like jumping off a very high diving board. Max helps me be brave. He understands me when I can't talk and helps me when I can try. She paused, breathing deliberately, the way Dr. Torres had taught her. Other kids need dogs like Max too. Some kids need different help, but everybody needs someone who understands them. She stepped back from the podium, her message delivered, her resources depleted. Max pressed reassuringly against her as superintendent. Monroe stepped forward to guide them back to Caroline. The board members, sitting in stunned silence before the chair, found her voice. "Thank you, Emma," she said. "We appreciate your courage in speaking to us today." 1 year later, the courtyard of Riverwood Elementary buzzed with excitement. Students, staff, and parents gathering for the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Emma Baker Communication Center, a dedicated space equipped with therapy animals, communication tools, sensory supports for children with various communication challenges. Carolyn watched from the sidelines as Emma, now 8, stood beside Superintendent Monroe and Principal Garrison, each holding ceremonial scissors poised to cut the blue. Ribbon stretched across the entrance. The school board had unanimously approved funding for the Animal-Assisted Therapy program. The night of Emma's unexpected speech, moved by her courage and the compelling data presented by Dr. Bennett. In the years since, 3 more service dogs had joined the district, 2 for children with autism, 1 for a student with severe anxiety. Emma and Max had helped train them, demonstrating techniques, communication systems, visiting classrooms to educate students about service animals, their roles, boundaries, appropriate interaction. Emma had continued her own progress, now speaking in short sentences with familiar people in comfortable settings, still using communication cards in overwhelming situations, still relying on Max for regulation during transitions or stressful events, but expanding her world incrementally, consistently, remarkably. Her academic performance had flourished once the communication barriers began to lower, revealing the bright, curious mind that had always existed behind the silence. Mrs. Rivera moved with Emma to 3rd grade, continuing their established routines while gradually introducing new challenges. Caroline felt a presence beside her, turning to find Principal Garrison, his posture less rigid than in their early encounters the past year, having softened some of his bureaucratic edges. "I never expected this outcome," he admitted, watching as Emma patiently showed a younger student how to use a communication board. Max, sitting alertly nearby, the advocacy, the leadership, the way she's helping other children. "She always understood everything," Caroline said, "just couldn't express it in ways we recognize." Garrison nodded, reflective. "It's changed how I see all my students, wondering what voices we're missing because we only listen in certain ways." The district comprehensive plan now includes mandatory training on alternative communication approaches, assessment protocols for identifying students who might benefit. From Service Animal Support, the ceremony began. Superintendent Monroe speaking briefly about innovation, inclusion, the commitment to reaching every child. Emma stepping forward to demonstrate the communication system she and Max had pioneered, now refined, expanded, adapted for different needs. She spoke into the microphone briefly, her voice still soft but audible, explaining how Max had helped her find her voice in more ways than one, the assembled guests applauding as the ribbon was cut officially. Opening the center, the reception afterwards flowed into the courtyard, refreshments served at child-height tables, Emma moving among the guests, Max always nearby, not hovering, but present, available when needed. Caroline marveled at her daughter's transformation, not just in communication, but in confidence, the way she carried herself. The eye contact still fleeting, but real, the sense of purpose that had emerged once she found means to express herself. Dr. Bennett approached his expression satisfied. "This exceeds even my optimistic projections," he said. "Amazing. What happens when we create systems that accommodate children rather than forcing children to accommodate systems?" Dr. Torres joined them. Emma's showing Zoe how to use pressure therapy. She observed gesturing to where Emma was demonstrating to a younger child how to place her hands on the therapy dog's side. The proper pressure technique, Zoe's mother watching with hopeful eyes. "It's become her mission," Caroline said, "teaching others. But she's learned meaningful communication always finds a way." Dr. Torres replied, "It's just a matter of recognizing it, providing tools, whether those tools have 4 legs or come in the form of cards, screens, signs, or symbols across the courtyard." Garrison was leading a group of visiting administrators from neighboring districts through the new center, explaining the equipment protocols, assessment measures. His former resistance transformed into advocacy. Caroline caught Emma's eye across the space, her daughter giving a small smile before returning to her demonstration, a wordless moment of shared recognition of how far they'd come as the event wound down. Emma found Caroline by the refreshment table. Max at her side. "Tired?" she asked. Stroking her daughter's hair, Emma nodded, leaning against her mother briefly. A rare public display of affection. "Can we go home now?" she asked, her voice barely audible in the diminishing crowd. "Of course." Caroline gathered their belongings, saying goodbye to the key participants as they made their way toward the parking lot. Emma's energy visibly fading, the day's social demands having depleted her resources. Max pressing closer, sensing her fatigue halfway to the car. Emma stopped, suddenly pointing toward the edge of the playground where a woman stood watching them. "Mom." "Who's that?" Emma asked. Caroline followed her gaze, seeing a middle-aged woman with familiar eyes and a tentative expression. Grace Buddy's owner from the park, the chance encounter that had started their journey toward Max. Grace approached slowly, Buddy no longer with her, his absence explaining the sadness lingering around her eyes. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I saw the article in the newspaper about the new center. I wanted to see how Emma was doing and to tell you Buddy passed away last month." "I'm so sorry," Caroline said, genuinely saddened by the news. "He was a special dog." Grace nodded. "He was ancient. Nearly 15. I think he held on just long enough to make sure his work was done." She looked at Max, then at Emma. "I never imagined that day in the park where it might lead." "Neither did," Caroline admitted. "But we're grateful every day." Grace knelt to Emma's level. "Buddy would be so proud of you," she said. "Of all you've accomplished." Emma didn't speak, but reached for her communication cards, selecting "thank you" and the picture of a dog. Then, to Caroline's surprise, stepped forward and gave Grace a quick hug before retreating to Max's side. The drive home passed in comfortable silence. Emma drowsing in the back seat, Max watching over her, Caroline reflecting on the circular nature of their journey, how a chance encounter with one understanding dog had led them to another, how Grace's kindness to a silent child had rippled outward, creating waves of change throughout the district, touching countless other children. The arbitrary boundaries between those who speak and those who communicate differently gradually dissolving. At home, Emma curled up on the couch, Max settling beside her, both exhausted from the day's events. "You did wonderfully today," Caroline said. "Proud of you." Emma smiled sleepily, her hand resting on Max's fur. "He knew I could do it," she whispered. "He always knew." Caroline watched them together. The golden dog and the girl who had found her voice, not just in words but in purpose, in connection, in helping others navigate the silent spaces between thoughts and expression. Max's eyes met Caroline's with an intelligence that still sometimes startled her with its depth. Sometimes the most profound conversations happen without a single word. Sometimes it takes a soul who has known silence to truly understand how to listen. Emma's breathing deepened as she drifted toward sleep. Max maintaining his gentle vigilance, Carolyn covering them both with a light blanket, leaving them to their shared dreams, their wordless understanding, their journey still unfolding together.